When you live in a very small town, you live in a glass house. We lived in a very small Pennsylvania town in the early 1990s. One day I went to the grocery store in the afternoon and I bought a bag of chips. The checkout girl said this to me, and I'm not making this up. "Those will go real good with that salsa your wife bought this morning." Everybody in that town knew everybody else's business. If you want to know what it's like to live as a goldfish in a glass bowl, move to a very small town. Well, 2,000 years ago, Nazareth was a very small town. The archaeologists tell us that in the time of Jesus, the population of Nazareth at most was 2,000 people, and it was probably just a few hundred. I'm sure everybody in Nazareth knew everybody else's business. And Jesus was an illegitimate child. Everyone agrees on that, believer and non-believer alike. No believer will say that the angel Gabriel appeared to everybody in the town of Nazareth to announce the birth of this child. Only Mary knew about it. Remember, even Joseph didn't believe her at first. So think how it must have been for this boy to grow up in such a small town where people knew that hint of scandal around his birth. Now, as I've told you before, Mark's gospel does not have the Christmas story. But later in Mark's gospel, Jesus will come back to his very small hometown of Nazareth. And it will not go well. People are going to say, "Who does this guy think he is? Isn't this Mary's son?" Now there's the small town tip-off. In that time, at that place, the normal thing to say would have been, "Isn't this Joseph's son?" But people always remembered that scandal around his birth, and you know what small towns are like. So when they said, "Isn't this Mary's son?" what they were really saying was, "Isn't this Mary's bastard? Who does he think he is?" Now, Jesus is sometimes called a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. And I suspect that the insults of his own small hometown were part of the reason. That kind of sneer can break a person's heart. I wonder if it broke the heart of the young Jesus. But here's the thing. When a heart gets broken, it can become bigger. I don't know why that's true, but it is. People with broken hearts often end up with bigger hearts. Someone who has known a deep grief can sympathize with me when I go through a deep grief. Our own struggles enable us to sympathize with those around us who are struggling. For example, when I was a kid in my school, there was a special class. Kids in that class were called retards by unkind children. Now, I knew it was the right thing to be kind to those with disabilities, but I only knew that in my head. When I grew up and had children of my own, my little girl turned out to be a member of the special class, a rider on the short bus, or as unkind children still say, a retard. My heart was broken, but that meant that my heart could become bigger. Now, I have a special place in my heart for any parent of a child with special needs or any person with disabilities. When your heart gets broken, compassion can leak out through the cracks. Maybe that's part of where the compassion of Jesus came from. His small town viewed him as illegitimate from the time he was a little boy, and I imagine that must have been painful and heartbreaking for him. Then he got baptized by John in the Jordan River, and the light flooded in. He heard words of love and approval, Jesus did, words from heaven itself. "You are my own dear son. I am pleased with you." We cannot overestimate the power of that experience for Jesus. All four Gospels put the baptism right at the beginning of his work. It must have been a real experience of joy and enlightenment for him. Seems like so many of the great spiritual and religious leaders have had some kind of enlightenment experience like this. Jesus immediately goes on a vision quest into the wilderness afterward to spend time sorting it all out. But forever after, he had a special place in his heart for the rejected ones, for the outcasts, for the broken ones, for the least and the littlest and the lost. He had emotional experience of what that's like. And now compassion leaks out of his broken heart. People with broken hearts often end up with bigger hearts.